who are these people? And why are these people being shown here on the screen to you? All these people belonged to one same position. Will you be able to say what that position is? That is the position of the Prime Minister of India. Till date, do you know how many Prime Ministers have been there in our country? Till date, we have had, or India has had 14 Prime Ministers. And it is Narendra Modi who is the 14th Prime Minister of our country. But who are these other people? These are some of the Prime Ministers of our country. But will you be able to find the odd one out? Yes, it is the image of Indira Gandhi that must strike somewhat odd to you. And what is the reason behind this? This is because all the images of the Prime Ministers of India that you see here are of male Prime Ministers. So, all the Prime Ministers are men. But Indira Gandhi was the first and the last woman Prime Minister that India has had till date. Now you must be wondering why we are suddenly talking about Indira Gandhi, who was a very able female Prime Minister in our country. Now the pattern that we see here, that one woman Prime Minister out of so many men Prime Ministers in India, this similar pattern could be seen in medieval India as well. Now this must have you questioning, what is our topic of discussion in today's lesson? Let us now find that out. The Prime Ministers of India that you saw just a while back have been the Prime Ministers of our country after India gained independence. But even in the medieval period, something similar was seen. So now let us go back to what we were discussing. We were discussing the slave dynasty in our previous lessons. And in the immediate previous lesson, we talked about the rule of Iltutmish. Iltutmish enjoyed a long rule of 26 years and he died in the year 1236. Now what happened after that? After the death of Iltutmish in 1236, his daughter Raziyya came to power. So it was Raziyya who now came to power of the Delhi Sultanate and she ruled from 1236 to 1240. Now Raziyya's rule is very important when we see this from the perspective of gender. This is because Raziyya was the first and the last Muslim woman to rule over Delhi. All this while we have been discussing the rule of various sultans under the Delhi Sultanate. We have been discussing the rule of Qutbuddin Aibak, Iltutmish. These were all male rulers. Even in the subsequent dynasties, that is the Khalji, the Tughlaqs, the Said or the Lodi dynasties, even in these dynasties only male sultans came to power. But it was only Raziyya, a very powerful and independent woman, who came to power after the death of her father Iltutmish in 1236. It is for this reason that her rule forms a very crucial event in history. Now you must be wondering how this event in history took place. That is, in a scenario where only men sultans came to power, how did Raziyya come to ascend the throne? We generally see that when a sultan dies, his brother, his son or any other main relative come to power. But in this case, it was the daughter of Iltutmish who now became the Sultan of the Mamluk dynasty under the Delhi Sultanate. Now, why did this happen and how did this happen? This is because Raziyya was more competent than all her brothers. So, her brothers could not ascend the throne after the death of Iltutmish. It was Raziyya who now came to power as the Sultan of the Mamluk or slave dynasty. A chronicler by the name of Minhaj-i-Siraj recognized Raziyya as abler than all her brothers. Now, this reason justifies why Raziyya came to power after the death of Iltutmish. Raziyya was a very independent woman. She wanted to rule independently. She was rebellious and fearsome, and from this she gained power. But the very idea that a woman was a sultan, that a woman was ruling a dynasty, wasn't seen in a favorable light by the people who were living there. So, despite recognizing Raziyya as more competent than her brothers, as abler than her brothers, this very chronicler Minhaj-i-Siraj was not comfortable with her rule. This is because he did not like the very fact that a woman was now the Sultan of the slave dynasty. Can you understand the hypocrisy that was at work behind this? In his chronicles, he wrote that Raziyya was more competent than her brothers, and for this reason she came to power. But at the same time, this same person was not comfortable with her rule only because she was a lady. This was an aberration in the first place because a woman was becoming a sultan. A woman was ruling a whole dynasty. So, despite being very independent, despite being a strong and able sultan, Raziyya could rule for only 4 years. This was very unfair. Only because she was a lady, she was dethroned in 1240. She was not let to rule for a long period. And all this happened because Raziyya was a woman. This brings us to a very important discussion of the history of medieval India from the perspective of gender. In one of our previous lessons, where we traced the various sources of history of the Delhi Sultanate, we discussed about the Tawarik. The Tariq or Tawarik was official document or official history of the Delhi Sultanate. This Tawarik proposed certain kinds of social order. This social order meant how a sultan comes to power, on account of what privileges a sultan comes to power. One such privilege was the birthright. So, simply by the virtue of being born as a daughter or a son of a sultan, one person could ascend the throne. So, it is on account of one's birth that they could ascend the throne. The Tawarik proposed this idea. We have already seen an instance of this when Raziyya came to power. Raziyya was the daughter of Iltutmish. So, by virtue of being born a daughter to a sultan, Raziyya now came to power after the death of Iltutmish. But soon after, we also discussed that Raziyya could not rule for a long period. Her rule was only of 4 years. Now, what was the reason behind this? That is, why did Raziyya not get to rule for a long period? The answer to this would be gender discrimination or gender distinctions. While the Tawarik proposed that one person could ascend the throne on account of their birth, it simultaneously stated the gender distinctions that were prevalent at that time. Social and biological differences between men and women were used to argue that men are superior to women. Biological differences we can understand, that being a male is different from being a female. But social distinctions were bred by the society, the culture. It is the culture that put men and women in a hierarchical order. So, these cultural practices made men, or these cultural practices assumed that men are superior to women. You can understand the gender practices that were prevalent in the medieval India. Men were automatically assumed to be superior to women. Now, women as inferior beings, that is, in this context, women as inferior beings, how can they rule a dynasty? So, the people who were living under the rule of Raziyya raised this question, that men are superior to Raziyya. Now, how can Raziyya be the sultan of the slave dynasty? It is for these gender distinctions, for these inherent gender biases, that Raziyya was dethroned in 1240. The society, the culture did not let Raziyya rule for a long period despite being a very independent and strong sultan, only because Raziyya was a woman. Now, this discussion of the history of medieval India from the vantage point of gender brings us to discussing few other women rulers who were in power in the medieval India. Let us now find out who these women rulers were. In this regard, we should definitely remember the name of Rani Didda. Rani Didda was the queen of Kashmir. Kashmir, as you can see here, she ruled Kashmir from the year 980 to 1003. Now, who was Rani Didda? Let us now find that out. So, Rani Didda was physically disabled, but she was very cruel and cunning and ruthless. And she ruled Kashmir from 980 to 1003 with a strong hand. But from where did she get the name Didda? This brings us to a discussion on how she got this name Didda. The word Didi means a sister. Owing to the gender biases that are prevalent in all societies, a sister is considered to be very feminine. A sister is considered to be demure, shy, affectionate and feminine. Now, as a ruler, Rani Didda could not have the feminine qualities that are supposed to be there in a Didi or a sister. It is for this reason that she was not called a Didi. She was not associated with the feminine qualities that we think of when we think of a sister. Now, why do we think of it this way? Because the society breeds these ideas in our mind that a Didi or a sister will be feminine, affectionate, warm, emotional. But Rani Didda, on the other hand, possessed the qualities of a man. Now, can you understand how gender was playing its role here? She was clever, ruthless, manipulative, and these are qualities that we generally associate with a man and not a woman. A woman is affectionate, loving, caring, and never clever, manipulative, and ruthless. It is for this reason that Rani Didda was not called a Didi, and instead she was called Didda. From this came the name Rani Didda, who ruled Kashmir from 980 to 1003. This discussion also throws light on the gender biases that were prevalent in medieval India. While discussing the strong women rulers of medieval India, we should definitely know the name of Rudramadevi. Who was Rudramadevi? She was a ruler of the Kakatiya dynasty of Warangal. Warangal is a place that is located in the present day state Andhra Pradesh of India. This is Warangal. And Rudramadevi from the Kakatiya dynasty ruled Warangal from 1262 to 1289. She was also a very strong ruler. Now, how did she rule? We already talked about how women were not given the space, the importance that they deserved. We saw that in the case of Raziyya, she was dethroned only because she was a woman. We saw that in the instance of Rani Didda, she was not called a Didi because she was clever, manipulative, and she was ruling as a ruler. This brings us to a very important point. How was Rudramadevi ruling the Kakatiya dynasty? Given the discussion that we had already, we now understand how women were not given the space and recognition that they deserved in the medieval period. In the instance of Raziyya, we see that she was dethroned after a short rule of 4 years only because she was a woman. Similarly, Rani Didda was called Didda and not Didi because she possessed the qualities of a man. Because she was a ruler. How can a ruler be feminine, affectionate? And it is for this reason that she was called Didda. I suppose you must be able to tell me what is being shown here on the screen. Yes, this is an image from the film Rudramadevi, where Anushka Shetty starred as Rudramadevi. Now, the very fact that a movie was made on Rudramadevi tells you how important she must have been as a ruler in medieval India. In fact, she enjoyed a long rule from 1262 to 1289. Now, in the case of Raziyya, we saw that Raziyya could rule for only 4 years because she was a woman. Now, how did Rudramadevi manage to rule for this long period? In order to rule a dynasty, that is the Kakatiya dynasty, for this long period, Rudramadevi hid her real identity as a woman. Can you imagine how difficult it must have been for her to promote a male image of herself only to be able to rule? Because the medieval India did not have space for women as rulers, and only to rule she promoted a male image of herself. In fact, on the inscriptions that were made during her rule, she changed her name from Rudramadevi to Rudradev so that no one got to identify her as a woman. This is the strategy that Rudramadevi adopted to rule for this long period. This strategy was in variance with what Raziyya did. Raziyya was very much the daughter of Iltutmish, and on account of her being a woman, she was not able to rule for long. On the other hand, Rudramadevi hid her real identity as a woman, and as a man she ruled for these many years. So the discussion we have been having till now tells us how the medieval India was in terms of gender discriminations and gender biases. With this, we come to a close of our discussion on the strong and independent Sultan, that was Raziyya. She was a very able and strong and competent Sultan. But only on account of her being a woman, she was dethroned in 1240. Now, this brings us to another line of discussion. What happened after Raziyya was dethroned in 1240? Did this mark an end of the slave dynasty, or was it continued under the rule of some different sultans? It is these discussions that we will be taking up in our subsequent lesson. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. You can also register for free at DeltaStep.com or download the DeltaStep app to learn one-to-one with our amazing teachers, or to get access to all our 5,000 plus amazing videos as per your school syllabus. Master each topic with our adaptive practice technology. Get million plus questions with step-by-step solutions and unlimited mock tests. Get all your doubts resolved instantly. Learn via games and win amazing prizes like PlayStations and iPads. So at DeltaStep, learning is not just fun and easy, it's rewarding too. So register for free now.